I was also the chaplain of the choir, and when I led the prayer, I always wanted them to go faster too, so I totally get it. So with that, I'd like to just talk to you a little bit about the history of the choir. This is a brief and condensed version of this. If you are thoroughly excited about the choir and want to read more, you can be the 13th and 14th person to read my book. So we will share that with you a little bit later. So there we go. So we'll just talk a little bit about the early part of the choral program here at Gustavus. It started as part of the singing curriculum. It was listed in the first catalog as being part of the curriculum along with reading, writing, arithmetic, Swedish, and Christianity. They started right away with teaching solfege and technique to prepare organists and teachers as their primary mission. Then the first choirs that formed in the early 1880s were formed to perform at commencement. And the first official groups to be listed in the catalog you can see there were the Calliope, the Thalia, and the Sappho. Just a little bit more about some of the early activities. The first catalog listing of choral groups on campus was in 1888 catalog. It was the Polymemic Octet, directed by C.P. Seashore. For those of you who are music education majors, Seashore went on to develop the Seashore Aptitude Test after he left Gustavus, and it's not used tremendously now, but historically it was a test to determine what the aptitude of elementary and high school students was. It's kind of an interesting thing. I'll stay on topic though. So that ensemble was an 8-member mixed ensemble, and then O.A. Allen directed a larger male chorus, which eventually then in 1888 turned into the lyric male chorus. This was the first real mainstay ensemble on campus, directed by Reinhold Lagerstrom, who was also the band director at the time here. It became the most visible group on the campus and also began the touring tradition of getting out into the areas away from campus. And this, by bringing this group out into the world, it became more, or it helped to build other programs. When they did tour, they toured with the band. As I said, Lagerstrom was the band director as well, and so they did tour with the band. But by bringing those things together, then we got to the conservatory chorus, which was the very first large mixed ensemble, founded in 1892-93 school year, also directed by Reinhold Lagerstrom, but after 1905, there were several different people that shuffled through that ensemble. This was an ensemble that was originally put together to to perform music by master composers, and they established a tradition early on of performing an annual oratorio each year. In 1898, they did the first oratorio here, which was the Holy City, and then kind of moved on from that. They did Creation, the 7 Last Words of Christ, and later came on to Messiah. And then that tradition moved from a traditional concert into the commencement time. So, and as well as, like I said, the Messiah at Christmas. And then in 1917, it changed from the conservatory chorus to the oratorio chorus to kind of show the traditions of the choir and what they were doing. About that same time as that was really starting to take off, the Schumann's Ladies Chorus was founded as the Echoes Ladies Chorus. This was the first female ensemble that was part of the ensembles, and it was formed since 1893, and it kind of founded its way through from that time. They were also the Gounod Ladies Chorus, and they shared a lot of concerts with the Lyric before then they became kind of their own entity of the Schumann Chorus. Carl Knock was the director of that, and they began their own touring traditions then in 1913. And then by 1916, they were together with the lyric chorus presenting a home concert, and then became combined and did joint tours, but still maintaining their own entity. There was a lyric men's chorus and a Schumann ladies chorus, but it was the first kind of hint in 1919 of the ensembles touring together as a mixed chorus. Then we move into when the Gustavus chorus actually started to beginning its founding. It was not okay, we started on this date. There were some starts and stops and kind of sputtered its way through. So the first one, Matthew Lindquist combined the two choruses into the Gustavian choir in 1922, but it was very short-lived. The interesting thing, as we kind of go through this, you'll see this. Each one of these three ensembles that you see, each programmed Praise to the Lord during their initial touring. Mm-hmm. So the tradition of Praise to the Lord actually goes back much further than where it became the traditional ending piece. So that chorus lasted about a year and folded in the fall of 1923 because of administrative changes at the college, but then came back as the lyric and Schumann choruses were continuing. They continued to thrive through this whole time. The next chorus then came back in 1926 and had another very brief expansion into the mixed choruses. The popularity and the amount of knownness, I guess for the lack of a better word, of the Schumann lyric chorus really did hinder the formation of these choruses. And it wasn't until Adolf Nelson started to combine those that we really found the Gustavus Choir as what it became. They still maintained their own entities. He combined them in what he called the a cappella chorus in 1930. But that group was really only put together to supplement the oratorio chorus. But again, performed also the works of the Christiansen traditions. But again, short-lived until we reached the actual founding of the Gustavus Choir, which was in 1932-33. It was the first time that the college choir, which is what it was called at that time, was listed in the catalog. And the college choir also featured the first concert tour of the group, 9 performances across northern and central Minnesota. And this is where we really start to see, from this point forward, the Gustavus Choir. And so I just want to talk briefly about the primary conductors of the Gustavus Choir since its foundation in the 1930s. The first conductor of the choir was Adolf Nelson. He served as the conductor from 1932 to 1942. His biggest parts were influences for the choir were really establishing the touring tradition, an every year tour, expanding the tour beyond just the short run-out type tours. I mean, in 1932, you're not going to be going great distances, but he was pushing out a little bit further away from campus. He also was instrumental in the Percy Granger tour. If you want to know more about that, Percy Granger spent some time on campus, toured with the band, the choir got involved with that, and they went on tour together with Percy Granger. Those of you who don't know Percy Granger, a very famous American wind band composer who also did a little dabbling in choral, but primarily known for his wind band works. And he also established what has become the tradition here of the home concert. Unfortunately, World War II came into being and the choir went into dormancy again. So during the World War II period, the choir did not meet, and Gustavus struggled to stay open during that time. It took a lot of effort to keep the college from folding during that time. But at the end of World War II and the V12 program and some of those things brought an influx of people to campus to be able to basically kind of save the college and keep it going. But because of this, and I found this very interesting as we were going through, the main reason that the college choir folded during this time is not because the men all went off to war, it's because of the lack of female students at the university, or at the college, which I always thought was a very interesting thing to understand at that time. There was still a chorus on campus during that time, but they really only sang in combination with the band, and was not what we know it as today. So after the war, Wilbur Swanson took over, reestablished the Gustavus Choir, the touring traditions of the choir. It was also during this time that the chapel choir was first formed, obviously not performing in Christ Chapel that we know today. During this time, also the college, was accepted into NASM, which I know we are no longer a part of, but at that time that was a big deal. And Wilbur Swanson was the first person to record a full-length recording with the Gustavus Choir. After his short stint, Eugene Castleman became the conductor. Eugene Castleman was a person based in the Westminster tradition, so he changed a lot of what, again, we know as the Gustavus Choir, and built a lot more of the Westminster tradition, where he did a lot more programming of music with instruments. Took on, again, the oratorio became a bigger process during this time. He reestablished the men's and the women's chorus, but he did also kind of take some of the traditions that we know and kept the touring going, and was the first to take the choir outside of the United States when he took them to Canada in 1953. Following Castleman, Phil Knauts came in. Phil Knauts was the first real long-term conductor of the Gustavus Choir. He is also the only Gustavus Choir conductor who was a Gusty grad. He did the choir from 1954 until 1980, greatly influenced by Paul Christiansen, who was at Concordia at the time. And he actually started his schooling at Concordia before coming to Gustavus, and was really influenced by Christiansen and the traditions of the choral school. And at that point, the choir then became more enthusiastically embracing of its Lutheran traditions and what that means as far as the choir is concerned. Through him, the music became very sacred-based. They went away from more of the instrumental performances, almost exclusively a cappella. And he really expanded the touring traditions of the choirs. There was a regular touring pattern. He kind of built a rotation, so they were going off into different areas. And he was the first person to take the Gustavus Choir overseas when I'm trying to remember the date now, I have myself here. 60 sometime. 67, thank you. There it is in my notes too. So he did kind of set all of that up, and also took the choir to the first time to the West Coast in the early 70s and into Hawaii. The tour, the 1967 tour, was a course to Scandinavia, where he did sing for the King of Sweden while they were there. After Phil came, I forgot about this part, during the Phil Knauts era, Christmas in Christ Chapel was established. It was the brainchild of Richard Elvey, but with him, the first group that kind of made the event happen was the combination of Richard Elvey, Phil Knauts, and David Feenan, who met that first time to have this first event in December of 1973. It was really important to the trio that this group become a worship service, not a concert, and that it was uniquely Gustavus. They didn't want to copy the traditions of other schools. They wanted it to be uniquely Gustavus. And they thought that since they had this wonderful chapel, which a lot of the other Lutheran Mafia schools did not have, that they would bring this tradition into that space with thematic elements and everything. And just kind of has become the great tradition that we all know today. So after Phil Knauts left, Carl Erickson became the director. He was the director from 1980 to 1994. He kind of was the taking the next step in the embracing of the traditions of the Lutheran choral school. He was the one who purchased the first velvet robes that we now think of, the iconic robes that we think of now when we think of the Gustavus Choir. He is also the person who established Praise to the Lord as the signature selection in the early 80s. Developed a greater tour rotation where they would alternate between a shorter tour, the more extended tour, a shorter tour, and then an international tour. And he was the first to take the group to Asia. He also had a lot of interesting exposure to world-renowned musicians started to bring to campus, and is known for the work that he did in the early 90s with the King Singers. And that brings us to Greg Owney, who took over the choir in 1995, served as the director until 2019. He also furthered the tour tradition. What he brought to the touring tradition that was different than in the past is he believed a lot more in getting into high schools as part of the tour, whereas before it was more about the evening concerts. So there were a lot more high school visits and those kind of exchange or shared concerts. He also is the first to have taken the group to Africa during the South African tour. He was also very influential in commissioning music and extended the repertoire a little bit within the choir to move away from exclusively a cappella to doing more with instruments and other things. And then as his tenure went on, he spent a year as the orchestra director, where then kind of brought more combined works with the orchestra as more of a mainstay of the choir program as it goes through. He was also involved with the founding of the Gustavus Music Showcase, the performances of the music department at Orchestra Hall in Minneapolis, and was the first conductor to take the Gustavus Choir to a regional ACBA conference. Which brings us to our current conductor, Dr. Dean. Dr. Dean has been here for a short time, lived through COVID, which is a very historic moment. Before he took over as the director of the Gustavus Choir, he did spend 2011 to 2019 on the faculty as the director of the chapel choir and the sea singers, and has done amazing things with taking the choir's great traditions and lifting those up while at the same time looking for new ways to expand those things. So, if this whet your appetite and you do want to be the 13th and 14th person to this book is available on Amazon. It's in the Gustavus Library. I'll just tell you a quick story about that for those of you students here. So it was in Greg's last year, or second to last year. They came through Sioux Falls. So I came up from Maryland to watch the concert, and my sister-in-law and her husband hosted a couple of members of the Gustavus Choir that day. And I came over to it before I went back to Vermilion. I came over, and my wife tells the story better than me, but I'm going to try to do it anyway. So I walked into the room, and one of the Gustavus Choir members who was standing there said to my wife, or was talking to her students, and said, or to her roommates, and said, "The guy who wrote the book that I'm reading right now is going to be here today." So I know at least one Gustavus Choir person. With that, again, thank you so much. Congratulations to all of you in the room for being a part of this amazing choir. Thank you again, Brandon, for the invitation. And I hope that you guys all enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so much.